Are you looking for a fast way to propagate your plants, or to get more growth, or even to see if a certain soil mix works better than another? Stick with me and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me. It's tropical houseplants. So today I thought I'd dive back into some experiments. I've done quite a few videos on the different experiments that we're going to be looking at the results of today. Namely, the first experiment was the water bubbler propagator, and I'll link the original video so you can see my very pathetic attempt at some DIY setup of that, but I'll put it at the top. Then an update on the experiment that I was running with the soil prescription soil mixes that I got recently. And ultimately the final kind of big test that I did a bigger video, again I'll link it at the top, which was testing things like notching on plants, trying things like Keiki Paste and reflective mulch. So a quick rundown of what each one of the experiments was. The bubbler itself was a device, basically a glorified big propagation box essentially, but an opaque one with water in it, and then something called an air stone, which is something that you see a lot of the times in aquariums. It creates bubbles. And the reasoning behind that is that a lot of people were saying, you know what, when we put some of our houseplant cuttings directly into like an aquarium with a bubbler, we find that it works a bit better. So I thought I'd create one, take you all along for the ride in that video on how I created it in case you wanted to do the same experiment, and see if that held true. The other experiment, which was the soil experiment, was that the team at Plant Prescription sent me some of their new soil mixes to try out. One which was their general purpose kind of houseplant mix, and the other one was the premium houseplant mix. Both had great ingredients in. The premier or the premium one had more types of aeration within it. So I wanted to test them both out. I did it with some cuttings, some reverted cuttings of my Burley Marks Variegata philodendron. It's not Variegata anymore, it's just the green Burley Marks, just to see how they fared against each other. And then the final big experiment was the one that I did where I tested three kind of lesser known techniques to kind of boost your houseplant game essentially, which was to use something called Keiki Paste. Keiki Paste is something that a lot of people that have been growing orchids for a while might potentially know it, which is essentially, I know not exactly this, but think of it as a growth stimulant potentially that goes on a node. Then something called notching, which was cutting just above the node, but not cutting the plant all the way through, just basically creating a deep wound to release the apical dominance so that the plant doesn't just keep growing upwards, but that it branches out without you having to cut the plant. Because obviously we know that if we cut the tip off a plant, a lot of the times you might get branching. This way you get to keep the branches and the main stem as well. So that was the other one. And then something called reflective mulch, which I think a lot of you who have watched the original video think that I'm slightly insane with the tinfoil hats and everything else. But all of this will start making a bit more sense. Obviously, the reason why I do these experiments the same way as probably a lot of you do your own little experiments is if we can all get an edge and make us growing our houseplants a bit better and faster and easier and all of the above, then why wouldn't we? And it's fun to experiment at the end of the day. It's fun to see, you know what, let's see what works and what doesn't work. But without further ado, let's look at the first experiment results. So this was the bubbler experiment. And I don't have the bubbler set up anymore. For the people that have been here for a while, I just had, it wasn't even that recently ago, probably a couple of months ago now, I had the new conservatory installed, and at that point when I was moving a lot of plants out, it wasn't feasible for me to move that whole thing with all the water and everything and then move it back in. And by that point I'd already seen some results, hopefully. because I've since changed my phone as well, which is where I had pictures, because I did take pictures of what all the cuttings look like to show you. Hopefully I've changed my phone, but the photos should have transferred over. I need to do some investigation when I'm doing my editing, but I'm pretty sure I've got them. I will add them throughout, basically. But yeah, let me give you my experiences with that. The reality is, and this is an experiment that I would potentially want to run again. I ran it in the middle of winter. It was kind of wintry time, I think, yeah. So it was very, very dark. I had it under a grow light, but the grow light wasn't particularly strong. So I do want to try it again with a stronger grow light, because I think, and this is, by the way, the result was that it didn't propagate things any faster, I don't think. But I think that might be because of the fact that it was growing under a very weak grow light, and not the fact that the bubbler wasn't doing what it needed to do. However, I will hasten to say, and I will show you the success story of that, there was my struggling philodendron heterocraspidum that I got from Ecuagenera, and it is growing. I mean, this was the original one that was propagating, but I have since got loads of lovely roots at the bottom. Hopefully I've got images and I can add it there, but it's got loads of growth in as well now. So for that, it was a great success. This other section was done in damp sphagnum moss in a baggie. Did that work as well? Yes. Did either one or two go faster? Probably not. However, I will hasten to say, when I tried propagating other cuttings of specifically the heterocraspidum in just plain water, they all either rotted or failed, basically. So sphagnum moss worked, and so did the water bubbler. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, I had some begonias in there. They did okay, struggled a bit. I had some Hoyas in there. They did really well. I mean, I think with the exception, and this is what I found really interesting, begonias did well. The philodendrons did well. The monstera did well. The one that didn't do well, ironic, was an Epipremnum pinnatum variegata. However, a golden pothos, or Epipremnum aureum, did really, really well, but it's a golden pothos. You can stick it in water and it will do fine as well. So there is that. Some of you out there might be saying, well, you know what, you put a golden pothos in a water that was shared with everything else. It could have just been the golden pothos trick, put a cutting of golden pothos in a water vessel whilst you're propagating other things. And because of the auxin that's released from the golden pothos, things tend to root out a bit faster. True. That might have also been the reason why I wanted to try this. I just wanted to see. But yeah, overall result with that one, I would say good. Not an awful lot of stuff failed. Was it any faster? No. As I said at the very beginning of this section, it could have just been the light. And I have a sneaky suspicion that it was just the light. I will be testing this again with a stronger grow light. What I might do for this one as well is try and have the same cutting in the water bubbler propagation bin and one in just plain water under the same grow light at the same time, and just pay attention to if there's any real difference in terms of the speed. And I will come back to you with results on that one as well. But you know what? It was a fun experiment. Overall, would I say it was worth it if you're really thinking it's going to make a big difference? Jury's still out, but based on these results, probably not. Is it 100% worth the effort just so you've got a bit of a DIY task that could be a fun way for you to water propagate? Yeah, but I'm weird. Not everybody, I mean, if it's no faster than just a water propagation where you can just cut something and just stick it in a jar with water without having to do all the faff that I did, probably for most people, that will probably be the preferred method. But I will say things that did struggle in water did do well. As I said, it's interesting because the begonia that tends to do well enough, I've propagated begonias, really rhizomatous begonias as well. Rhizomatous begonias well in water, they do take a while. It did work maybe a bit faster in the bubbler. The things that I also kind of discovered is that there's a lot of loss of water because of all the bubbles, potentially some evaporation, all of these things. So the the water line kept dropping significantly. So I would say if you're going to try this again, see if you can get that black bin with a lid that isn't flat on top of it. So it has a bit of a dip and goes down. I know it sounds really weird, but it will bring your little kind of net pots with the leca a bit lower and deeper into the water without you having to fill it quite so high up, basically. But overall, try it if you want to just have a fun little experiment that you can do yourself. But would I rush to do it again, other than the fact that I'm going to re-experiment with it? Probably not. So coming into the second experiment that I wanted to give an update on, which was the soil prescription soil mix experiment. And that was between the general mix and the premium mix. Now I will say something, there was a couple of comments that was made on that original video. If you want me to test different soil mixes against each other from differing companies, happy to do that as well. We can keep it all level and the same, and I can take, oh, the poor golden pothos. Oh, I could see if I've got other similar cuttings, and I'll make sure that I'll have two or four, I'll do multiples of two, obviously. Say we go for two, and I'll go for the same plant, cut from the same vine, potentially at the same time, basically. So for the example of a golden pothos, I'll take a vine, I'll chop it in two, so I get two different nodes, but they're going to be from the same plant, from the same vine, and test them in the two different soils, just to keep it fair. And I will keep those two soils with those plants in the same conditions, basically, next to each other, so they are getting the same amount of light, humidity, watering, all of the above. But for this one, I thought I'd try, because I was sent it over to kind of test out and see what I thought, those two different soil mixes. The one, as I mentioned very early on in this video, the general houseplant mix was great. It had loads of different good ingredients in there that created a lot more aeration. But as I said on that original video, that would be better suited for the plants that need to retain a bit more moisture. I'm not thinking, words are hard again. I'm not thinking of things like an anthurium, which needs to be kind of, the kind of saying is it needs to be evenly moist most of the time and not really dry out. I kind of disagree with that, but it also needs a lot of aeration. That one was less airy than the premium mix. Both of them airy, but the general one was less so, if that makes sense. So good for things that need, like for instance, a fine root philodendron, which needs a bit more moisture possibly around its roots, but still have some aeration so it doesn't get root rot. That would be a good one. For something like an anthurium, which does need a lot more of that aeration, I would say go for the premium mix. But let's have a look at the two plants. And the two plants, as I mentioned earlier on, two cuttings, same plant from my original Burley Marx variegata, the big tree that unfortunately is no longer with us, but I do have variegated cuttings and they're growing into their own little plants now, basically. But I had two reverted sections from that plant. So I thought, let's try it together. And I put it in a clear plastic cup just so we can see the rootage. And I also labeled one of them so I know which one is which, because my memory is shocking. So let's have a look at both of these, shall we? And I will say that with the philodendron Burley Marx, they're not particularly thin roots. So there is that to kind of bear in mind there. But let's start with the general mix one, shall we? So this was a general mix one. This had more leaves than the other one. I know you kind of probably noticed that this has one leaf and this has more leaves. This one had more leaves generally. I think this had 2 or 3 in that original video. It's now got 4 and 1 on the way and a little node there. But I'm going to bring you in so I can show you, and hopefully it will focus on the roots there, and you might be able to see that it has done exceptionally well. And you can see as well some of the dampness that is happening around there. That is because this one, as I said, is the general mix and it retains a lot more of the moisture. It did get more fresh leaves. I'm pretty sure that's new and that's new. I think that was old and this was old as well. So this has grown faster. They are both right next to each other, so they are getting the same light, and they were both being watered at the same time. Now, the other one, which is this one, which is in the premium mix, this one I will definitely show you the roots because this is beyond impressive. I don't know if you can kind of see how many more roots this one has in relation to the other one. And this one's a lot thicker. Now I will say the node on this one is buried quite deep. So when it does start growing a new leaf, it will have to go up quite a bit, but I couldn't put it any lower because it didn't have very much roots to begin with. Both of these did have some roots to begin with when I put them in as per the original video. And this one's doing really well. I mean, the leaf is really turgid. The roots have gone insane in this one. And I will say, just on my own personal note, really, the team there did send me the bags to try out. The premium mix I've used up really quickly, and I'm now going through the general mix as well, both which are really good, but you can read something into that. Other than I'm not a snob that just went for the premium mix, but the premium mix was the one that I gravitated to first, especially for plants that I knew were struggling. And the interesting thing is, and I will probably do a separate video on this, I did have some plants that I moved out of pon after I've been trying for a long time and moved them back into soil mixes. Guess which mix I went with? The premium mix. So this one has been very good for me, and everything that I've put into this one so far, and the general one actually, have done really well, but the premium one is spectacular. So, results from both of these. Both really good soil mixes. Both really good soil mixes. As I said, different benefits, and pretty much my assumptions when I was starting that experiment I think have held true. So if you've got something with chunkier roots that prefer a bit more aeration and they don't mind not being that moist all the time, premium mix 100%. If you've got something that needs to retain a bit more of that moisture, general mix. If you can't afford the premium mix and you still want to go for the general mix, go for the general mix, but maybe supplement it with some extra perlite. It's nice and simple, and you can kind of almost get the approximation of this one as well. I think the reason why I quite like the premium one is I think there is coconut husk fibers, not fibers, chunks in it. There is so in this one as well, but there's more in this. This is very airy. Overall, successful for both of these. Very cool soil mixes. Moving on to the experiment with the Keiki Paste. And the Keiki Paste, for those that don't know, is a paste essentially that you would put onto a node, usually on an orchid, to help promote either more flowers or an extra flower spike. Potentially, sometimes you might get something that I think itself is called a keiki, I think, which is a baby orchid growing, a new orchid growing on that node, and then you kind of wait for it to get roots and then remove it and plant it out, basically. But from what I could see, it releases a hormone, and I cannot remember, I think it's cytokinin, I might be wrong, and I'll put it up the top there, and that's what kind of helps promote that. And I know a lot of people have done experiments with this to see how they fared. I found it quite interesting because apparently, according to the packaging, it works on things like Hoyas, it works on Monsteras. I tried it on a philodendron or two, I think. Did I? Possibly? I will see, and I will add pictures if I have. I have not tried it on an anthurium, but yeah. Shall we look at some of the results? And I'll add pictures in because annoyingly, everything that I tried it on is in really awkward places, but I will have either clips or photos to add in. So the first one that I did, I tried it on a length of, and I'm looking at it now, Mandula pothos or Enjoy pothos? I think it was the Mandula, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. And My epipremnum corner suffered a lot before I painted all the glass. Essentially, it was getting toasted. So it lost a lot of the leaves on the beginning of the vines and still had loads of leaves at the bottom of the vines. But if you've ever owned something like an epipremnum, you know that it's very rare that a node that has lost a leaf would activate to grow more leaves or have new growth there. So that's what I wanted to test, and I tested it in different places. I tested it with larger chunks of variegation, lower parts of variegation, and the results have been successful so far. I also tried it, and I can't remember if I kind of showed on that original video, to add the Keiki Paste to a running node or a runner from a Monstera obliqua Peru. Anybody that owns a Monstera obliqua Peru, and hopefully there's more of you out there now that the prices have gone down considerably based on what they were like a couple of years ago, you will know that runners are an issue basically, and you can be chopping and propagating runners until the cows come home essentially. However, that was very exciting because that also activated. It's still running. None of these things have had major growth just yet. And the problem that I'm having, and I think if I was to do the experiment again, what I would change is only put Keiki Paste on one node instead of 2 or 3 nodes, because I got greedy. So I did that. I'm kind of looking at it now, and I think I also did it on an epipremnum, not epipremnum, a medium. Words today. What is going on? But let me just double check that now. Obviously we'll add photos and videos here so you can see, but I think that one worked as well. Yes, it did work. So, but all of these things, maybe it's not been that long, and I think from some of the comments that I was seeing on that original video, people were saying it does take a while to activate those nodes. It takes a while to activate those nodes. I mean, the interesting thing is the medium takes forever to grow, and that one has grown, that little growth point on the node that I put the Keiki Paste on, at the same speed as something like a Monstera and an epipremnum, so that was good. But yeah, learnings, as I was saying, keep it to maybe 1 of the actual nodes and see how it goes. The other thing I will say is I don't think it will move too fast with the Monstera obliqua Peru, because that was the thing that I'm just like, have I just thought of something that's a bit of a game changer? I would have assumed a lot of people would have tried this by now because it runs as much as it does, the obliqua Peru. But I'm just like, is this the way to get over the issue with the runners? Theoretically, yes, if you've got a long time to wait, because those little buds kind of like appeared quite early on. Have they done much since then? Not an awful lot. Are the kind of growing points still growing new leaves? Yes. So theoretically, you could cut the growing tip and then add the Keiki Paste to maybe a couple of places to maybe guarantee branching. But theoretically, if you're cutting the growing tip, you're releasing the apical dominance, and more than one nodes might activate. A lot of the times you can almost guarantee that at least one node will activate. You can't always guarantee that more than one will. This might be a way to kind of force it to activate multiple nodes rather than just the one, if you are cutting off the tip and releasing the apical dominance. There is that. So mixed bag. I would say good, because it did something. It worked and you can see it. Is it worth it? The jury is still out. It hasn't been long enough. It did say on the packaging that it needs 2 to 3 weeks to start seeing any results, and that was about right. I think it's been longer than 2 or 3 weeks now since I did the experiment. I will double check. But yeah, I think it's been a bit longer than that. And yes, they did start appearing. It took a while, so you need patience with this. Let's move on to notching. And notching, for the people that didn't see that original video, is when you've got a growing stem. This is something that people do a lot of the times on ficuses. And essentially what you would do is you would say this is the stem of the plant. You would make a cut that goes about not all the way through, but maybe a quarter to 3, maybe halfway through. And because you've created that cut, it releases some of that apical dominance back in and potentially could activate the nodes that are underneath that cut there. So if you've got a node there and you make the cut there, this node would activate and you would get branching. In theory. And when I was doing the original research of this, and I said this in the original video as well, this doesn't work always. I think it's like kind of a 50-50 chance of it might work. I know, as I said, people have done this with ficuses and they've had good success. This is also a technique that a lot of people have been doing in garden plants for years. So there is definitely merit to this, otherwise it wouldn't still be carried out with regular garden plants. But I think everybody says the same thing. It's a bit of a hit and miss, and it could work potentially. I only tried it with a really struggling propagation that I had growing for a while, now in a soil mix, in a net pot, and it was the philodendron white princess propagation, and it's here. And as you can see from the fact that it's a one stem, so far it has not worked. Again, this is another one that said does need a while, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't. Ooh! I take that back. I thought it hadn't worked. I would have thought that it would have activated lower, but maybe not. This is interesting. So you might hopefully be able to see, if I cover my face up there, you might be able to see, can you see that? It's right there. Oh, there you go. You can kind of see the cut that was put in there, and you can see how far I went with that one as well. And I was expecting the node to activate around where I made the cut, but I don't know if you can see that little growth point right there that I just noticed. So possibly, because the discussion that was happening, I was going to say that pretty much the reason why I thought it hadn't worked is because I got this growing quite quickly and there's more leaves coming up the top, and I thought that this would slow down to activate something else. But this is super exciting because I thought this was a failed test. And the reason why I was leaning towards thinking that this had failed is because this has worked sometimes, not always, on ficuses. And I think the comment that was being made from a lot of people is that you needed a harder stem, really. So I don't know, sometimes if you've seen stems where they start going a bit brown and they look a bit like tree stems, it's called corking. And a lot of the time some plants do that as part of their natural growth pattern, and something that's a soft stem like this would have been potentially. I mean, this is a very soft growing stem up here. This is kind of much more hardened off at this point. So they were saying, oh, if it's a soft stem, then it probably won't work. You need a hard stem. So I wasn't too sure if that was classed as a hard stem. The other thing as well that I'd kind of seen is that sometimes with these cuts is that you need to have something in there to keep the cut open, because I don't know if you can kind of see, I keep taking it back and showing you that cut there, it looks like it's healed. So potentially having something, it needs to be sanitized and cleaned in that cut so it kind of stays, it keeps it open. That might have activated a bit more. I did not try it with that, and I said I might do if this was a success. I hesitate to call this a success, but it's something to see. So I might try that again with putting something in that cut and seeing how that plays out if I get that activating a lot faster. But yeah, that surprised me, because this one I was going to say was a fail, but a partial success, I guess. Possibly an interesting one to try. And this is where we bring the tinfoil out for the last one. This was the reflective mulch. And people thought I was a bit weird with this one. The theory behind this one was that if you've got something for plants that are in quite shaded areas, if you've got something on top of the soil or the growing media that reflects the light back in, you can kind of utilize that light a lot more. And I don't know if you're noticing what is happening over the reflective mulch, because that wasn't there before. This entire stem has since grown. This was right next to a control plant that did not have this growth happening. it's continuing the same way and it's a bit weaker. But because this had the reflective mulch, it reflected some of that light back, and some decent growth has happened. So this was also a bit of a success, I would say. And this was an interesting one because one of you actually reached out on DM on Instagram and said that they do something very similar with kind of, I think it's that reflective blanket material that you get sometimes. See, when people are in shock or cold, things like that, you know, the one that looks like tinfoil that wraps over, I think that's what it was. And this individual has got that around the kind of walls of what looks like a bit of a grow tent, essentially. Oh, I have asked permission to share pictures and videos, and they have said that it's absolutely fine. So you can see how lush their growth is with exactly that. And it kind of makes sense, actually, when you think about how some people are growing in grow tents, it makes sense because a lot of times it is that reflective material to just utilize as much of that light. Usually in that situation, it's something like a grow light to reflect back in. This might be something that people know, so this might be something that people don't know. So if you've got something like a grow tent that doesn't have reflectiveness going in and you've just got a grow light, you could be missing out on a trick of having the walls of that probably quite dark tent be reflective to reflect some more of that light in. So definitely an interesting one. You're not going to have tinfoil on your plants, let's be real, because got some funny comments with that one. But we talked about things like the decorative glass beads that you can put on top of things like that. So there are other things that you could do to reflect back. Another simpler way of doing this as well is sometimes if you've got things near a window, I don't know how good this is for Feng Shui basically, but you can have a mirror quite close to that plant in that window, as long as that mirror is reflecting back some of that light as well. Again, you're utilizing that in a more aesthetically pleasing way than tinfoil. But same thing goes as well, like if you've got your plants and there's a light that's coming there and there's a window there, but there's also a white wall directly behind it. White walls or white color generally will reflect the most amount of light back into the plant in relation to, say, for instance, a cream wall or a beige wall or even a black wall. White will reflect the most amount of light back. So that could also help boost that light that that plant is getting. Arguably with something like white paint, it might be marginal. It's still going to be marginal with things like tinfoil and mirrors, but probably a bit more because it's reflecting more of that light back than something like a white wall. But I'm rambling enough as it is. But yeah, I will say that the reflective mulch made that vine grow faster, more robust. The colors were quite good on the leaves. The leaves are much more sizable as well. So overall, it's a lot happier. So coming into some of my final thoughts and conclusions with this. Interesting mixed bag, basically. The soil mixes were both quite good, but as I mentioned, depending if you want more airy mix, go for the premium. If you want something a bit denser, go for the general mix. Water bubbler, fun as a little experiment. Will be retrying again, but I don't think it was any faster. And I know that other people have had great success. That's why I want to retry it. I truly think that it was my lighting that was to blame there. And when I say lighting, by the way, just to clarify, I'll see if I can add a picture as to where it was. It's the most lowest shelf right at the bottom, which gets hardly any light. It was right next to a radiator in the winter, so it was getting some heat, and because of that water that was bubbling out, there was a decent level of humidity down there in terms of a microclimate. So, but for now, I would say fail question mark on that one. Coming on to the video where I did the Keiki Paste experiment. That one I would say success question mark as well. So it did something. It might be too early days. So it does do what it promises on the tin. It's just not particularly fast. But at the same time, if you were never going to be able to achieve that in another way, that's still good, right? So yeah, good-ish success. Fun, definitely fun to play around with. Definitely fun to play around with. Notching was going to be a fail. Possibly a success at the moment. Time will tell with that one. But there was that little tiny growth point that happened. So possibly successful to re-experiment. And then reflective mulch, which everybody's finding really hysterical. Success. It worked really well. And as I said, I've shared videos from one of the viewers as well. It works quite well. So yeah, overall, I'd say with anything like this or with any experiment, do it. Have fun with it. Always, 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 and this is coming from somebody who used to do a science degree as well and was a biology geek as well at school, have a control. So always try to have two things. One, which will be what you're experimenting. This is at a minimum, by the way. Scientific experimentation goes a lot deeper and a lot more permutations than this as well. So you need one, which will be your experiment. So this plant in whatever condition or thing that you're testing out. And then this other plant that needs to be the same as this one, as close as you could possibly get it to this one, which will be your control. So in normal conditions where you would normally have it. So if you, let's take an example of something like a soil mix that you've bought versus your own soil mix. So what you would do is have, again, I'm going to use example of a pothos cutting, a pothos cutting and a pothos cutting. This will be in the new soil mix. This will be in your existing soil mix. This one will be in the same location or as close as possible to this one. So the only thing that you're changing between those two is the soil. And friendly tip from your forgetful YouTuber person, label it, because you might forget which one is your experiment and which one isn't. So yeah, but these things were always fun to try out because you know what, the notching, I truthfully didn't think it was going to work. I might try it again. The Keiki Paste is interesting. I might try it again. The reflective mulch, yes, but I've got enough light as it is at the moment. I was doing it more for your benefit because I know people have got some slightly darker corners in their houses, so this would be something that could change that up a bit for you without having to have a grow light. And the soil mixers, they were both good. They both worked like a charm. Would they have been interesting to try with different types of plants? Yes, but I didn't have time to do that. But over to you if you want to test them, please go ahead. But I'd be interested to see, have you run any experiments? Do you have any experiments that you want me to run as well? Drop it in the comments down below. And let's keep the geeky scientific interest going, because I love the fact that you as my audience really do enjoy these slightly more scientific-y kind of videos. I'm not a scientist by profession, I've said this. I have said it in the past. But I do find these things exceptionally interesting. But yeah, anyway, I've prattled on for way too long for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.